Marcus Williams stood silently at the front desk of the Hampton Hills Hotel on a Tuesday night, as the clock struck 11:30. Beside him, his German shepherd named Duke sat neatly, quietly, like a shadow. No barking, no unnecessary movement, just sharp, observant eyes and a vest labeled Service Animal, PTSD, Support. He said nothing as the receptionist, a young woman in her 20s, began entering his information into the system. But with just one glance at Duke, the atmosphere shifted. Moments later, she began typing additional charges onto the bill: $200 pet fee, plus $50 per night. No explanation was offered. Marcus maintained a calm tone as he handed over Duke's service documentation, the same set of papers he'd shown at dozens of other hotels without issue. But this time, they seemed meaningless. The woman dismissed them and replied stiffly, "We have a clear policy. Pets incur charges, papers or not." The desk phone rang. She picked it up, and her expression changed in an instant. Her voice dropped, and then came a curt sentence: "I'm sorry, sir, but you need to pack your bags and leave immediately." A soldier who had once survived war, who had traded away his peace to protect a nation, now stood in the middle of a hotel lobby, being asked to leave, simply because he needed support to survive in a world where not everyone understands wounds that can't be seen. Marcus is 32 years old, but his eyes look far older, dressed in simple civilian clothes, with neatly trimmed hair and a posture that remains upright. He still carries the quiet demeanor of someone who has survived a battlefield. Beside him, Duke, the black and gray service dog, is not just a companion. He is a mental shield, a silent gatekeeper standing between Marcus and a world that may appear calm, but hides countless psychological triggers. Duke doesn't just accompany Marcus, he reads him. Every small signal, a shallow breath, a slight tremble in the hand, a glance that loses its focus. Marcus had driven 12 hours straight from North Carolina to Colorado to attend his sister's wedding, a journey long not just in miles, but in memory. Sudden braking, the blare of a horn, or the flash of high beams from oncoming traffic, any of them could echo the battlefield, where he once traded his peace for survival. Throughout that entire drive, Duke acted like a living radar, detecting and diffusing panic attacks before they fully took shape. The moment Marcus's breathing turned ragged, Duke would gently tilt his head and brush against his leg a simple message that said, "I'm here. You're safe." And yet, in a place meant to offer rest and welcome, a hotel clerk who had never set foot on a battlefield dared to deny the existence of that invisible war. Marcus joined the Navy at 18, an age when most of his friends were still choosing college majors. But for Marcus, that decision wasn't born from a dream. It came from sudden loss. His father, a construction worker, fell from scaffolding during an overtime shift. His mother, a thin but resilient woman, suddenly became the sole provider for 3 young children. Marcus's family had no inheritance, except for mounting debt and an empty seat at the dinner table. Enlisting in the SEALs was the only way he could take back control of his life. And Marcus didn't just survive, he excelled. From grueling physical trials to relentless psychological training, he was always the one commanders trusted and teammates relied on. After 4 deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq, Marcus became the man who could read terrain like a book, the one who sensed danger before it appeared. They called him Ghost, never loud, never reckless, always in the right place at the right time. Until the day he wasn't. In the span of just 1 week, 3 of Marcus's closest teammates were killed by improvised explosive devices. Marcus had been point man on 2 of those patrols, the one tasked with detecting threats before anyone else. And when he failed even for a second, the guilt consumed him like acid. He completed his service, but what he brought home wasn't medals. It was nightmares, sudden panic attacks, and a shattered belief that he had done enough to protect those he loved. Marcus didn't seek out Duke because he liked dogs. He sought out Duke because there was no other way to survive in a peaceful world where his mind was anything but. After leaving the military, Marcus couldn't sleep through a single night. Every car horn, every unexpected knock at the door could yank him out of sleep and into a nightmare. There were nights he'd jolt upright, drenched in cold sweat, eyes locked on a shadowy corner of the room, as if he were still in a combat zone. Duke appeared like an anchor, holding Marcus back from the edge of a cliff, trained by an organization that supports veterans. Duke was no ordinary dog. In 18 months of intensive work, he learned how to recognize when Marcus's breathing turned shallow, when his hand started to tremble, subtle cues that signaled an oncoming panic attack. Duke didn't panic with him. He would simply place a quiet paw on Marcus's leg, inch closer, and create space between Marcus and the crowd, as if using his own body to form a fragile safety zone in a world too overwhelming. When Marcus couldn't ground himself, Duke did it for him. When his mind started drifting back to days of loss, Duke gently brought him back to the present with a loyal gaze, or a calm, steady touch. Duke never asked Marcus for anything. He didn't need praise, didn't expect gratitude, because Duke knew his job wasn't to be loved, his job was to keep this soldier whole. And that's why. When Ashley, the front desk clerk, looked at Duke and saw just a pet with a fee, Marcus didn't just feel insulted. He felt like a piece of his life had just been erased. But at the hotel front desk that night, all of that, the trauma, the training, the bond, was dismissed with nothing more than a few keystrokes. Ashley, the night shift clerk, glanced at Duke for no more than 3 seconds before typing new charges onto the bill: $200 cleaning fee, plus $50 per night. Marcus calmly handed over all his documents, certification papers, medical records from the VA, official service dog registration, the same folder he'd shown at dozens of hotels before, never once questioned. But Ashley barely glanced at the paperwork before shaking her head. "We've seen plenty of documents like this. Anyone can print these off the internet. A pet is still a pet. Everyone pays here." Marcus tightened the strap of his backpack slightly, steadying himself. He didn't want to argue. He didn't want a scene. But in her eyes, Duke wasn't a lifeline. He was just a dog in a vest, trying to dodge a fee, and Marcus a man who had once laid in desert dust. Placing his life in the hands of his brothers was now being judged by nothing more than appearances. "You look healthy to me," Ashley said coldly. "You don't seem like someone who needs assistance." She had no idea. Mental pain doesn't leave scars, but it bleeds from the inside. The hotel lobby remained quiet, lit by flickering fluorescent lights and filled with the faint, lingering smell of old coffee. But inside Marcus's mind, everything was starting to scream like a siren. Ashley's cold remark, "You don't look disabled," echoed in his head, over and over, like a dull blade scraping away at his dignity. His chest began to tighten sharp, fast, constricting. His right hand trembled slightly. His breath quickened. His left eye scanned the room automatically, instinctively, the way it had learned to do after 8 years of special operations: identify exits, locate blind spots, assess threats. But this wasn't a war zone. This was a mid-tier hotel lobby. And somehow, that made it worse. Duke, who had sat quietly by Marcus's side the entire time, gently leaned against his leg. The pressure wasn't heavy, just enough to pull Marcus back into the present. A small, silent touch. A message without words. "You're not alone. I'm right here." Nearby, a businessman waiting for the elevator gave a sympathetic glance but didn't intervene. An elderly couple quietly stepped back, whispering something while watching everything unfold. Marcus stood in the middle of the lobby, suddenly feeling exposed, stripped, vulnerable, in a way no incoming fire or explosion had ever made him feel. Because in combat, he always knew who the enemy was. Here, the threat wore a name tag and followed policy. Marcus had planned to stay quiet. He had considered just paying the ridiculous fee, anything, to avoid conflict, to preserve his fragile peace. But then a voice inside him spoke low, tired. but firm. If I back down today, how many others will be treated the same tomorrow? He pulled out his phone, opened the camera, and began recording. Ashley's demeanor shifted immediately. Her voice tightened, strung like a violin string pulled too far. You can't film here. This is private property. If you don't stop, I'll call security. Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He just looked her in the eye and replied, calm and steady. I'm documenting a potential violation of civil rights and federal law. I need evidence for an ADA complaint. And that was the moment Ashley crossed a line she could never come back from. She raised an eyebrow, pointed directly at Duke, her tone openly mocking. Real service dogs don't look this. You probably bought that vest online, right? Don't fake it. It's not a good look. Her voice wasn't quiet. It carried loud and clear across the lobby, enough for other phones to start recording too. Some guests turned their attention toward the scene. Others began looking up service dog laws on their phones. This was no longer a private dispute. It had become a public confrontation between ignorance and truth. An older man, the same businessman from the elevator, quietly stepped forward, leaned toward Marcus, and said, "If you need a witness, I'll stand with you." Ashley, realizing the crowd's focus had shifted to her, began to unravel. She threatened to evict both Marcus and Duke, accusing him of disrupting the peace. But then, the desk phone behind her rang its sharp, sudden tone, slicing the tension in the air like a blade, and everything was about to change. Forever. The phone rang a second time, echoing through the lobby like a warning from something bigger than the room itself. Ashley answered with a touch of irritation, her tone still laced with the frustration that hadn't quite left her voice. "Good evening, Hampton Hill's front desk. This is..." She stopped, within seconds. Her expression shifted from confident to stunned. She froze, eyes wide, hand gripping the phone just a bit too tightly. The entire lobby seemed to still, as if everyone could sense the air had changed. On the other end of the line was the legal compliance department at Hampton Hill's corporate headquarters. No one knew that the well-dressed businessman who offered to be a witness had deep ties in the hospitality industry. One quick call from him had opened a door to the top. The voice on the line spoke slowly, but with absolute clarity. They had received a complaint about a possible violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act ADA, and were now monitoring the situation in real time. Marcus was no longer just a guest. He had become the focal point of a corporate-level audit. Charging a certified service dog is illegal. The hotel could face serious legal consequences, including fines and civil lawsuits. Ashley stammered, trying to justify herself with policy, regulations, unclear documentation. But the voice didn't let her finish. It turned cold, not loud, but razor-sharp. "We've reviewed Marcus Williams' documentation through the system. Everything is valid. As of this moment, you no longer have the authority to make any ADA-related decisions. All charges must be removed immediately, and a formal apology must be given to the guest." The final sentence dropped like a stone into still water. "A senior manager is en route, and this incident has been escalated to the executive board." Ashley set the phone down slowly, her face drained of color. She said nothing for several seconds, just stared at Marcus, who now stood not as an isolated customer, but as a man at the center of a reckoning she never saw coming. 10 minutes after the fateful call, Ashley returned to the front desk with a completely different demeanor. The arrogance was gone. Her voice was now soft, almost trembling. "Mr. Williams, I sincerely apologize. All charges have been removed. Also, the hotel would like to upgrade your room to a suite at no additional cost. Breakfast, flexible checkout, everything has been arranged." Marcus said nothing. He didn't need to raise his voice. His silence, calm, steady, was the most powerful form of resistance, because now he no longer needed to prove anything. 40 minutes later, the senior manager arrived, shirt half-buttoned, pillow crease still etched on his face, but his posture was composed, serious. He shook Marcus's hand and spoke clearly. without hesitation. On behalf of the entire Hampton Hills chain, I sincerely apologize. The way you were treated tonight is unacceptable, and it will not happen again. The manager didn't stop at apologies. He committed to real change. A complete overhaul of ADA training programs, system updates to properly flag legitimate service dog documentation, an urgent memo to all branches in the chain titled, "Never again will a veteran be disrespected like this." As a final gesture of sincerity, he offered to cover the cost of Marcus's sister's wedding gift, a small token to thank him for his patience, on a night that had spiraled far beyond anything expected. When Marcus and Duke entered their new room close to 100 a.m., Duke immediately performed his usual safety check, sniffing the corners, inspecting the exit, and then sitting silently beside the bed like a quiet sentinel. Marcus sat down on the edge of the mattress, gently resting his hand on Duke's head. He exhaled slow, deep, and for the first time in hours, he wasn't shaking. 6 months had passed since that night Marcus stood quietly in the hotel lobby, judged by a glance and a line of text on a screen. His life moved forward quieter now, but by no means easier. He still battled sudden panic attacks, still carried memories that refused to rest. But one thing had changed. Marcus no longer felt like he was fighting alone. One quiet Saturday morning, he received a white envelope, stamped with the insignia of Hampton Hills Corporate. Inside wasn't a legal document or a formal report, but a handwritten letter, penned in neat, rounded script. The first letter came from the corporate legal team, thanking Marcus for his calmness and courage during that night. But the second letter tucked behind it was from Ashley. In it, she admitted to being thoughtless, uninformed, and too quick to judge not just a person, but wounds she had never seen. Since the incident, she had completed an intensive 8-week ADA training course. Now, she was one of the most knowledgeable employees in the entire system when it came to invisible disabilities and service dog accommodations. She ended her letter with one simple line: "Thank you for not yelling. Thank you for not walking away. Because of your patience, I now understand something thousands of other guests may never have to suffer." Marcus folded the letters and sat quietly, not because he was overwhelmed, but because he understood something deeply. That night, though small in the scale of the world, had left a crack in the surface of perception. And from that crack, light had started to shine through. Marcus didn't burn down a system. He didn't demand anyone be fired or publicly shamed. What he did was simple. He stood tall in a place that once made him tremble and said, "Enough." Not with anger, but with the quiet eyes of someone who had heard real gunfire, someone who understood that not all justice comes with thunder. Some arrives quietly and stays forever. Duke is still by his side every single day. He doesn't care about federal law or hotel policies. He only knows one thing: Marcus is someone who must be protected. In crowded cities, among cold buildings, surrounded by people who seem to know everything, there are still wounds that have no shape, no bandages, no braces, just averted eyes, ragged breaths, and sleepless nights. And that's why Marcus didn't fight to win. He fought to educate, to awaken, so that on that night, in an average hotel lobby, it wouldn't just be one employee who learned something, but an entire system that had to look in the mirror. This story didn't end with applause. It ended with something greater. A veteran kept his dignity. A service dog kept his sacred role. And a society began learning to listen to wounds that have no words.